Welcome back, party members. Now, I am here to tell you all about the wonderfully glorious supernatural adventure I went on this Halloween weekend. Today we're going to be talking about the Goblin Ball. Now, I don't expect you to remember, but a while back I mentioned the Goblin Ball as a LARP I was trying to go to. Only I wasn't able to get a ticket because there was a lot of interest in the ball. So I cried into a pillow, put the page on mute, and got a ticket to the Wild Hunt instead, which I had a fabulous time at. So it was to my surprise when just a few months ago I had an email drop into my inbox telling me that they were offering me a ticket as a part of their waiting list. So I said yes. For those of you who aren't familiar with the event, the Goblin Ball is based on a combination of different Fae fantasy elements, partially based on the film Labyrinth, slightly based off a Court of Thorns and Roses, and its predominant element being Christian/Old English mythology, which associated fairy folk with the devil. Essentially, you were playing a goblin or a fae person, depending on your interpretation, and you were a member of a court. Traditionally, the courts for fae are things like Seelie, Unseelie, or one aligned with the Four Seasons. However, the number of courts at this particular ball was closer to 30. You had night, you had day, you had all four seasons, you had thorn, oak, willow, you had clay, you had magma, you had lightning, you had storms. There were a lot of different concepts of what kind of fae were there, and all of them were open to our own personal interpretation. So essentially the aim of this ball was we were all gathering together for an annual event where we all met up, broke bread, and essentially all decided which member of our courts were going to be sacrificed to the devil as a tithe for us all having our supernatural powers. Because, you know, that's normal. So when I was offered a ticket, I was more than happy to go, especially since my court that had been assigned to me was the Night Court. Now, in case you aren't aware, I have mentioned this before, I love a Court of Thorns and Roses. So to be an official member of the Night Court is, I think, a dream that only LARP could truly fulfill for me. Character creation was quite freeform as well. There was no sort of strict guidelines as to what we had to be other than operating within the theme of our court. And there were no assigned characters either. So essentially it was entirely freeform. You could do pretty much whatever your imagination came up with. Because me and my partner Nick, were quite late to join the court, most of the court members, who are all super sweet and super lovely, and if any of you are watching this, thank you so much for role-playing with me that night, you were incredible, had already come up with some basic concepts and things that they wanted to work the court around. They'd already signed sort of roles of the monarchs. So we had to kind of fit in with what they had already planned. Lucky for us, the plan they had was awesome. And they had come up with this idealized mythology of the relationship between the moon and the moth, which led to some of my most favourite imagery in the world, which is lunar moths, because I think they look beautiful. So yeah, it wasn't too difficult to kind of come up with a character concept. I wish I'd had more time to kind of flesh it out, but that's okay. I came up with this idea of a ancient fae who weaved the dreams of mortals into a cloth for purposes unknown. And I chose this concept because I am a relatively shy human being, believe it or not, and I wanted a concept that would allow me to have an excuse to interact with people on my terms, but also an excuse to ignore people on my terms, because I didn't know many people going, and I was quite nervous about talking to people, because for some reason roleplay still terrifies me. Yeah. In addition as well, I had this brilliant idea of having this glittering cloak as part of my costume that was sort of covered in glitter, so absolutely covered in glitter, so it looked like starlight. I attempted to put it together, caused some problems at home. Mainly glitter went everywhere and I couldn't get it to stick properly. So massive costuming fail. So I ended up going in a simple black ball gown with some rather dramatic makeup, which looked great. But once I got there, I was acutely aware that my costume in comparison to others had just kind of failed. But never mind, you live and learn. I don't think I would ever LARP again on such short notice. I think I would like more planning, more timing, and definitely more time for prepping costume. But I didn't look terrible. I wore this beautiful black dress, which I have to say I look incredible in. So yeah, maybe not the most glamorous Fae there, but hey, I looked most epic I had looked in a while, so props to me. It was held at Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum in the beautiful city of Glasgow. It's the furthest I've travelled for a LARP in quite some time. I think it's the furthest I've ever travelled for a LARP because I've yet to go international. I will say this, it's definitely the first time I've flown for a LARP because I wanted to get up and down the country quite quickly for my son. And that was an experience because as it turns out, EasyJet charges a lot of extra money just for basic things like an extra bag in the overhead bins. So we decided to make do with 2 smaller bags that you could fit under the chairs in front of us, which meant we had to pack light. So in hindsight, not having the cloak was probably for the best because I wouldn't have had room for anything else in that bag. The art gallery itself was absolutely beautiful. We had the whole space, I think, to roleplay in. Most of the event was being held in sort of like the main central hall, mainly because that was the only place we could take food and drink. So people didn't want to leave their drinks behind. So most of the roleplay kind of operated within there. But I did get a chance to wander through a couple of the galleries and a couple of the art exhibits while doing some sort of sneakier roleplay, and it was absolutely really cool, absolutely beautiful. Some beautiful pieces of artwork in there, which I wasn't allowed to take photos of because some of it is on loan to the museum. The space was utilised really interestingly as well. Essentially, the game began the second you walked in through the door, which is an interesting concept that I've not encountered too often. Most games I've gone to involve a briefing ahead of time or a set time in time. And the reason is that these briefings are usually for various safety reasons, both in character and out of character. They remind you of the rules a little bit. They give you reminders of safety signals if people are uncomfortable with certain parts of roleplay. This game didn't have that, but I did know that it wasn't going to have that ahead of time. They were quite explicit that the game would start the second you entered the building. So I fortunately did make time before the game to just review those things from their online rulebook. But yeah, just going straight into it was very different. And it was really cool because you enter on sort of a lower floor into this beautiful sort of almost antechamber, which I think is near the museum gift shop. It was a lot of stonework and glass. It looked gorgeous. And then you make your way up the sort of grand staircase into the sort of central area where everything was. And this place is stunning. It's 2 stories. It's got this massive sort of organ at one end of the room, and at the other end of the room, right up in the gallery as well, you've got a choir singing to us. I can't remember the choir's name. I'm going to put it on the screen here right now, but thank you very much, all of you. You were brilliant and your voices are stunning. And it was a really interesting way to start the game because going straight into it with no briefing whatsoever and this sort of, you know, chorus sort of in the background, the atmosphere was quite intense right from the get-go. And some people lent really hard into it. People were role-playing straight from the start. They clearly had their own agendas, which I will go into in a second. And it was definitely by far one of the more interesting and intense ways I've ever started a game. Other than the music and the giant room, there were pretty much 2 things that really struck me, and one was the number of people, because as I said, there was about 30 courts. Each of those courts had around 10 people in them, so we're looking at 300 people in a room, which is albeit a big room, but it's still quite tightly packed with 300 people around 30 tables or so, because we had dinner at this event as well. And also the level of costuming was so far above mine that, just like I said, despite me looking incredible in this dress, I was by far the most drab person in that room. There were gorgeous sort of glittering gowns, beautiful sort of, you know, ornaments and veils and crowns. Or some people had these like amazing trains full of flowers or ruffles to look like ripples of water. Like, I'm an untalented idiot, and I have never felt more like an untalented idiot. Standing in that room full of people who clearly know and are so much more talented than I. Oh, so beautiful. They all looked so amazing. And then to top it all off, they're great role players, because the whole game was based around political intrigue. Like I said, the whole point was that we were all going to be sacrificing someone in this tie to the devil. And right from the get-go, it was blatantly obvious that everybody had different plans as to how this was going to go. And it was so interesting to watch all these people sort of literally flittering about, coming up with some very interesting political alliances and deals, all vying to push their agendas before the end of the night, which wasn't a lot of time, to be honest, because the event was a single night event, so there was none of us coming back to kind of, you know, follow it up in like an event or two. And to top it all off as well, it wasn't that long either. We all got in at about 7 o'clock and the event was going to be over at 11. 4 hours is so little time to get things done, especially political machinations. So I think one of the things I'd underestimated was how much pre-thought should have gone into my own political agenda, because we were all given one. It was one of the sort of guiding things that was sent out to us from the wonderful planning team of the Goblin Ball, was we were all given a plot hook that would give us an idea of what we could try and do over the course of the event. The plot hook I was given was that the devil was not in fact a devil, but actually a goblin with more intense power. And if he was a goblin, it meant that he could be replaced. And I think the intention is that I would start a plot to essentially become the devil. I did float this kind of loosely with my court, but my own shyness drove me against pushing it too hard, which is fair. I'm not great at being the center of attention, and I'm not great at necessarily pushing things forward. I am a bit sad that I didn't get to take it too much further, but at least I did float it somewhere. I'm clearly not the only person who got this plot hook though, because the idea of overthrowing the devil kind of leapt out from different areas all over the place, because nobody wanted to pay this tithe in one way, shape or another, except for maybe one or two courts who had their own plot hooks. But yeah, it kind of became quite obvious very quickly in the evening that the general plan was we're going to overthrow this arsehole. And everyone had different ideas on how to do it, as it turns out. The game's never going to be run again, but I'm not going to go into too much detail as to what happened, partially because it ended all very quickly. The game had some rather interesting mechanics, particularly one based around tarot cards, which was really, really cool. There was a whole deck of tarot cards, beautifully put together by the event team, and a lot of the tarot stuff was kind of being orchestrated by the Fool, who was an NPC who came around with his deck of tarot cards, and he was facilitating roleplay and pushing plot points, essentially through tarot card readings. And I decided to take him on in one, because at the end of the day, we were never playing this game again, so it seemed a bit silly to not push for some form of, you know, trinket or tool to try and get plot going a little bit. And it was fun, and I got this beautiful tarot card, which they let me keep after the event, so thank you very much, Mr. Fool. That was awesome, and I will treasure that card for a very long time for such a great evening. The tarot cards were a bit interesting because, like I said, they have different powers, and some of the cards were already out in play and in possession of the courts before the game started, which made things a little bit interesting because all the ones that seemed to be out in play already in the hands of players were cards that had specific powers that were quite intense, I think is probably the best way to say it. Which made the political roleplay interesting because there was absolutely no way you could get them to let go of it. There was no combat element of any kind, so you couldn't force them to give it to you. But to add to that as well, they had no motivation to trade them either. So it encouraged players to do a lot of cooperative roleplay rather than pitting courts against each other, which is an artistic choice. If I was running it, I think I would have proposed a little bit more PvP conflict. Politically, not necessarily in an assassin stabby kind of way. But yeah, but like I said, it's an artistic choice. Definitely wasn't the wrong way to go. And the collaborative storytelling that the game finished with did make it very interesting, and you could see the amount of hard work people had gone to communicate with each other and make deals and essentially come up with the solution to the tithe. That was quite creative and then went a bit askew at the end, but hey ho, that's roleplay for you. I think if I had to really change one thing about it, I would have made that game longer. And I would have had less courts. Just because with 30 courts of 10 different people, you've kind of got a lot of different agendas going. And because there was only so much political intrigue in place, there were a lot of courts who I felt never really got to make a stand or set themselves up as, you know, important figures within the chaos. It kind of came down to just a few courts, particularly the ones that had the cards or the ones that really put themselves out there. And fair play to people, because, you know, putting yourself out there and creating roleplay is one of the best things about LARP. But it did make it a little bit trickier for people who were kind of a bit shyer, a bit, you know, not as comfortable to roleplay as others, especially if that was their first event, because I know it was for some people. The only other thing I wish that had been different about the game was I wish it had been longer. And I get why it couldn't have been longer. It was in a public venue, which had probably a very fixed amount of time as to how long it could be used for. So I can see why it would only be for a very sort of, you know, 4-hour block. But 4 hours is very little time to get stuff done, especially if you've got a meal in the middle of it as well. For the amount of roleplay that there could have been and the amount of space used, I would see that being a day-long event. Like, literally, like, I would have loved it if we could have gone from lunch till midnight. I feel like we could have gotten a lot out of it. We could have done a lot of different things. But, you know, limitations are limitations, and I'm talking in an idealized world where money is no factor and, you know, venues are highly accommodating, which neither of those things I think were available. It was a spectacular night to be a part of, especially over Halloween weekend. I would absolutely go to a game run by these organisers again, just because their sheer ambition does make for some really cinematic looking events. So yeah, thank you very much to the organisers of the Goblin Ball for such an incredible evening. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. This is the last LARP event I'm actually doing in 2022. So it's now going into a slight peaceful time as I move into the gloriousness of 2023. I'm hoping to be LARPing relatively early in the year if everything goes according to plan. But yeah, I hope you've all had a magnificent year LARPing in 2022. I hope that if you haven't LARPed so far, that you get the opportunity in 2023. This is not the last video for this year. I've still got several things still coming out, believe it or not. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all had a fabulous Halloween. I hope you have a fabulous rest of 2022, and I'll see you on a battlefield soon. Bye.